I am sure you won't be shocked to hear this, but I like Bendy and the Ink Machine. I like the game, I liked Boris and the Dark Survival, and I even play Bendy Run occasionally when I'm waiting at the dentist. I also have a surprising amount of Bendy merch, such as Bendy Blanket, Bendy Air Freshener, Bendy Lanyard, you get the gist. The Bendy cartoon shorts are cute and the Crack Up comics are adorable. Indeed, I really like Bendy. That being said, I won't say it's perfect. In fact, Bendy and the Ink Machine, the flagship game, made a huge mistake. In case you do not know, the game released in chapters instead of all together at once, like the sequel is supposed to. We're getting news on the sequel tomorrow, by the way, which is why I'm making this video. So, what was Bendy's biggest mistake? Was it the excess of merchandise? Was it jumping into books, like FNAF did? Was it competing in a world where Cuphead exists? No, it was Chapter 3 of Bendy and the Ink Machine. Let me give a little preamble leading to this chapter. In Chapter 1, Henry arrives at the studio, stirs up the ink demon, and gets trapped further inside. In Chapter 2, Henry runs across Sammy Lawrence and has to evade him to continue further on. Now Sammy Lawrence is a very important figure in this because while I might be wrong, I believe he might be the reason Chapter 3 turned out how it did. Upon the release of Chapter 2, Sammy became a fan-favorite character. Something that still lingers even today. His popularity wasn't too surprising to anyone who's paid attention to other popular characters, and this is likely why he makes a return in Chapter 5. I'm not sure if his reception is why Chapter 3 turned out the way it did, but part of my suspects so, because in Chapter 3 we are introduced to Alice Angel, a twisted version of Alice. A femme fatale with tragic backstory implications, and then she all but consumes 2 parts of the 5-part story. That isn't to say she is a bad character. But that is to say that all of Chapter 3 is comprised of fetch quest missions where the most substantial amount of plot boils down to listening to her talk down at Henry. It ends with her taking our friendly Boris, and the next chapter, Chapter 4, is about going through the old Bendy land junk to try and get him back. Chapter 4 feels like a proper chapter. In fact, Chapter 4 pretty much feels like what 3 should have been. As the gimmick of being introduced to the villain early, going through the section, and then confronting them at the end was already established in Chapter 2. Chapter 3 feels like filler, 4 does not. Okay, so that's it then. It's over. Chapter 3 was bad, but 4 was good, so it's all fine now. No, because Chapter 5 is where we see the effects of Chapter 3. At the end of 4, Henry is rescued by Allison Angel and Tom the Boris. 5 begins with him as their captive, then there's an ink boat section where you're chased in a tunnel, then he arrives in the Lost Ones harbor, Sammy appears and attacks him, dies. Henry teams up with Allison and Tom, then he heads to the archives, then we find out Bendy's critical backstory in an audio log, then he heads to the ink machine, fights Bendy, kills him with a tape. And the cycle repeats. It is a lot that happens pretty fast. Chapter 5 gets a bit of a bad rap, but I don't exactly think it's that chapter's fault for how it turned out, if that makes sense. Now, the ending isn't great, I'll admit. It's confusing and convoluted, and you can tell it was a quick rewrite from when they decided that they no longer wanted Joey to be Bendy. Which is what I believe was the original plan. You know, you wake Bendy, he has a messed up leg, there's a wheelchair in Henry's vision in the first chapter, Beast Bendy has undeveloped human legs, and he looks human. And Joey seemed to have issues in which he always wanted more and was never content with what he had. They keep that Joey uses a wheelchair in the finale, but I think this might have been a plot point carried over. Imagine a man who always feels like the world is looking down on him and tries to overcompensate with his vision, becomes so obsessed with perfecting his Bendy that he outright becomes him. All speculation, of course, but I do believe this ending was not the original intended one. And we'll see in the Bendy teaser tomorrow, but I think I know why they didn't want Bendy to be Joey in the end. But all this being said, though the ending isn't great, it isn't what sinks chapter 5. It's the fact that it must do so much in only a matter of one chapter. Practically in the same amount of time Henry spent doing errands for Alice. Chapter 3 took up so much time that it basically handicapped the rest of the game. In comparison, 4 was a lot more balanced in both gameplay and in story, and even featured 2 bosses. 2 bosses that might have been able to be separated further if there wasn't that time crunch. But what does this have to do with Sammy? Well, I think that after seeing how Sammy took off, they tried to do a similar thing with Alice. Make her creepy but sympathetic, scary but pretty, another character that the fan base would eat up, as they typically do, and I think it backfired. Part of the reason Sammy was so popular was his brevity. You see just enough to get invested and then he's gone. He does talk a bit, but no monologue, nothing to annoy the audience, and then he's retracted abruptly, which usually leaves an impression on the player. Alice got 2 full chapters devoted to her for some reason when she really shouldn't have. Sure, she's an important character, but she's not that important. Especially since one of the chapters was so much filler. The better option would have been to cut a majority of chapter 3, cut a little off of chapter 4, and then make them into one. There you go, a full and complete chapter. You run into a new threat, she gives you a reason to chase her, you fight Boris, she dead, and moving on to the next part. Then all this in chapter 5 could have been spaced and expanded on in 2 more complete chapters. Bendy needed more screen time towards the end. In fact, the whole 5th chapter should have had a bigger ink demon influence so that you could feel the rising tension. The discovery of Bendy's creation should have been a bigger deal as well, with at least Henry stopping and acknowledging it, maybe in a cut scene. This is the biggest mystery and most important part of Bendy and the Ink Machine. It's Bendy himself. It could have used more wind down before the end. Do I think they will make the same mistake with the next game? Likely not, because Bendy and the Dark Revival is supposed to be releasing all at once as a complete game. This unbalance was definitely a result of how the game was being created. Once that chapter came out, they couldn't really go back and change things to the extent that it might have gotten if it was under full production. I'm not sure what to expect from the next game, but I'm glad that we're finally getting some news about it. Watch, now that I said all this, the teaser's going to come out tomorrow and reveal that Alice Angel is a major character.